The In-Laws, the final part. A story by E.B.'s Hart. Having Emmanuel in our life is like a dream come true. The past 1 month that he has been with us seemed so surreal. So please take good care of him for us, Mrs. Gambo. Ifechi's new mother was giving the nanny she employed to take care of Ifechi a pep talk. Mrs. Gambo works with one of banks in the country, and she was given 1 month leave to be with her new baby Ifechi. When the leave was over, she employed a nanny for her dear son, whom she named Emmanuel. Emmanuel was loved by everyone around. When Mrs. Gambo's pastor baptized him in his church, the entire church attended. The nanny, whose name was Jane, was excited, because the pay was good and she have access to food too. 1 week after that nanny had resumed duty, she started noticing strange things in the house. Like she could just find herself sleeping for hours and she would be struggling to stay awake. Whenever she wakes up, she will see Emmanuel sleeping too. She could come in the morning and just fall asleep once she sits down, only to wake up in the evening. This went on for over a month, before she spoke to her sister about it. "This is dangerous. How can you be sleeping like that? And the baby?" the sister asked with worry. "That is even more strange. Whenever I wake up, I will find him sleeping in the same position." "I am confused," Jane said, crying. "I think I am sick," she said, and continued crying. "Calm down, Jane. I have an idea. I will come to the Gambo's house during your work hour. I will come and observe what is going on while you are sleeping," Jane's sister assured her. The next day, Jane slept off as usual. When it was midday, her sister came to the Gambo's apartment. She was about to knock when she heard, "Emmanuel, drop that cup, you will break it." She smiled and looked through the window. Then she saw Jane backing her while doing something. She left and said, "Thank God she is fine. I slept all through today too, and you failed to check up on," Jane said angrily at her sister, once she got home. "What are you saying? I came around and heard your voice and even saw you doing something," Jane's sister said while screaming at the top of her voice. "It's not possible." Immediately I stepped into their house. I haven't even kept my bag. When I yawned and fell on the couch, I was struggling to fight the sleep. The next thing I know, I was waking up at my closing time. Although I usually notice that all his food would finish, and the chores done. "But why can't I remember what happened?" Jane said and started crying. "Please come to the house with me tomorrow, and maybe video me doing these things. I need to see a doctor, but I need to also have evidence. This blackout is getting out of hand," Jane said with anger. The next day, Jane's sister told her to go, that she would come and join her later. When Jane got there, she slept off as usual. Her sister came and looked through the window, but what she saw made her run for her life. She saw Jane sleeping on the couch and the same Jane cooking and talking with invisible people. The scariest of what she saw was Emmanuel talking and sounding like an old man. She ran home, fidgeting and crying. I couldn't even save her. She was still crying when Jane got home and slumped on the chair crying. It happened again. I slept all through. She was still talking when her sister hugged her. "Something is spiritually wrong with that baby," Jane's sister narrated what she saw. Jane sent a text message to Mrs. Gambo to inform her that she have quit her employment. The night of the same day, Jane saw Emmanuel in her room. She thought she was dreaming until he held her throat and squeezed life out of her. The news of her death scared her sister so much, she believed it was Mrs. Gambo's baby that killed her only sister. The more she explained, the more she was seen as crazy, until she ended up in a mental institution. Jane belonged to the marine world. She even tried to harm Emmanuel, but failed because he is not just an ordinary baby. He is God's own son. Mrs. Gambo's pastor was prophesying for Mrs. Gambo. "Thank God he is safe. The next nanny you will employ must come and see me. Pastor Ezra," Mrs. Gambo's pastor said with his eyes closed. Few days later, another nanny who attended the same church as Mrs. Gambo resumed at Mrs. Gambo's house. She worked for only 1 week and had a fatal accident, leading to spinal cord injury. Yet more nannies were employed, but they all ended up fatally. It was when Mrs. Gambo lost her job, for no good reason, and her husband left her, that she started looking for solution. "This is a cursed child. Take him back to wherever you got him from, before it is too late." One of the seers, Mrs. Gambo, went to Sed and asked her to leave his presence. Several years later, Emmanuel joined a cult group in school. He became their leader and was terrorizing the whole country. He found his father, Mr. Gambo, and shot him dead, claiming he abandoned him. By the time he was 40 years old, he has already founded his own confraternity named Children of Fora. His mother died of heartbreak and neglect. He became very rich by giving power to people that will do anything to have it. Politicians bowed at his feet, pastors lined up at his altar, leaders of conglomerates licked his feet. He became the greatest priest Fora ever had, because he was more ruthless than his predecessors. 100 years later, a lot of people he knew had died and were forgotten, yet more people kept coming to him for powers that are fleeting, for things that will not last, no matter how much you preserve them. Therefore, the cycle continues.